gentlemen, our final session before we break for lunch. We have with us our next speaker who's going to be talking on sustainable beams. We have with us Shreyas who is an architect, researcher and educator. He is the co-founder and co-director at the New Materials Research Center, that is NMRC, at the ISDR School of Design and Innovation in Mumbai. In 2018, his research initiative, the Green Charcoal, was exhibited at the Future of Architecture and Building by Ania, Mumbai. So please put your hands together for Shreyas
Thank you very much for the introduction. It's a pleasure to be here amongst you all and talk about some of my works that we do in the research lab in collaboration with fellow professionals and students and myself. Why materials is because if you look to your left and to your right, we are surrounded by materials which have been taken from the nature and been transformed into bottles, t-shirts, paper that you interact with. And these materials have a constant way of interacting with you. So I'll start my presentation with a little bit of background to how materials create experiences for people. It's a research inspired by Elvin Karana from Technical University in Delft. She talks about every material has 4 layers of inspiration or interaction with you, talking about sense, how we sense materials, how we feel the materials, what we think about them, and of course, how materials act and how we act towards them. But why this is all important is because today material industry has become an amazing avenue for innovation, not from the experience point of view, but because, like even Thomas mentioned, these have been extremely transformed. So how can we look at safe manufacturing processes, extraction processes, how consumers use them, and above all, how do we dispose these and what materials become at the end of their life. So if we take some examples, that's how you can have sensory experiences with things around you. That's an amazing project by designer Fernando Laposse. He looks at using agricultural waste as a resource for creating furniture and sculptures or murals. On the left that you see is when people interact with his furniture, what you see is colors, you see softness, you see hardness and smooth textures of these cladding materials. Where on the right hand side you see he has used fibers from corn cobs to create installation where people can enter and hug and be part of material world. Some other examples are how materials make you think. Sometimes you think a material is strange. Sometimes you think a material inspires certain emotion. That's an installation by Ernesto, who is an artist, sculptural artist from Mexico, where he's looking at use of soft materials like cotton, sponge, textiles to create massive volumes where people can enter and interact and feel cozy about them. So how do you interpret materials through design? What do you feel about them? Sometimes you love a material. When you open a book, you smell it, you love the smell, it reminds me of certain memories. So materials can also find a way, to interact with you from point of view of emotion. And sometimes you hate them. That's an amazing experimental product. It's called Fabrican, where material fibers are reinfused with skin-safe, safe adhesives, and these can be directly sprayed on your body. So every morning, if you are in a certain mood, your garments can take a certain shape as per your desires. But more importantly, it excites you. The idea of taking material and technology together in your own control to make what you want to make is super exciting. While on the other hand, this is the extreme other end of design industry where we talk about performance. Traditionally, a lot of designers, a lot of us, we are talking about performance from point of view of strength, from point of view of longevity. But Neri Oxman and Claudia Pasqueros, both from different continents in Europe and America, are looking at living sustainable beings, which can be part of our interior spaces and can also be part of our garments. So on the left you see an installation where algae are used to create, to purify the air inside, because these constantly absorb carbon dioxide and give out, oxygen back to us. And of course, with great amount of oxygen, we do have higher performances where people can, be more alert, more functional, more optimum in the way they think and function. While on the other side, Nerioxone is looking like biointegration, where, or sort of on the molecular scale, how bacteria can be part of our garments and in a way try to grow on our body and purify our sins. But every time when designers have to design these material experiences, we ourselves found in two radical different cultures. One is of extremely high tech, where we look at robots for construction, manufacturing, or on the other side we look at people, making potteries, with their hand, or garments with their hand. We also look at complex materials like shoes, where leather, sponge, thread, stitch, they're all stitched and layered over each other to create a composite. Often we can't separate them at the end of their life, but on the other hand, we can also look at something which is super simple, like a glass, where in its entirety it is sufficient to become a product for a good use. Or can we look at areas which are flexible and transformative and rigid on the other hand. We also look at multifunctionality, like one material playing a role of multiple agents, like we saw in the early installation, where we have interior partitions, but they also purify air, they also give you better experiences, and they also make you feel more energized. Or can we look at materials which have just one function, like can they purely absorb sound and create silence rooms? And of course, the whole argument of is something too synthetic or something too biological. I'll come to this point a bit later in my presentation, but I want to say that every time we develop new material areas or any product, garment, buildings, we are capitalizing or we are using a lot of resources, and these are scarce. In around 200 years, we'll be out of coal that we use to produce electricity. In around 40 years, we'll be out of oil, which is used to make all kinds of polymers and plastics. In around 5 years, around 1.8 million people will not have access to water. And that's an alarming situation, but it brings to a point, it's not about using materials from nature, but it's more about how we manage them. Are we creating waste at the end of their life? Because everything was once natural. Plastics that we assume or relate with, from the most synthetic, materiality is actually made up of oils and petroleums. These have been extremely transformed and engineered to create what we have created. But the truth is, complex materials end up in landfill, not because we don't know how to recycle them, it's because they are way too complex, they are layered. So if you take an example of packaging carton, you have plastics, you have metal foils, you have agents to keep the juice inside healthy. We have ink, for branding, and these create one composite, much like shoes that you wear. And when at the end of the life we want to, optimize on the material quality, we can't do much about them because they're usually ground. There's no way to separate the ink from the paper unless you use a lot of water and bleach it. So recycling should be ideally the last resort to using material values. But before that, can we look at simple materials that can allow us to refurbish, remanufacture, or repurpose existing items around us? This is an amazing example where jeans or used jeans has been sort of ground down together to create acoustic panels. What I love the most about it is waste from one industry has been used to create a functional product into other industry. It can be a great acoustic panel. It can also be a great thermal insulator, so we end up less on air conditioning when we have climate change and global warming. But the important question here to ask ourselves is that super smart in 2020? This is a great example because the waste has been created. But if we are developing new materials, is it worth averaging down the material quality and mixing everything together? From which what I mean to say is when we ground, we are not really capitalizing on individuality of each component, which a jeans is made up of or a shoe is made up of. And that's why it's not the smartest thing that we can do, but that's the best we can do today because the materials have been manufactured. With that lens, having said that, if we look at landfill as material banks of future, we can find more answers to valorize the waste and have sustainable economies. Sustainable economy because the moment we don't have to depend on new extractions from earth, the cost of investment reduces as our materials are already available close to us somewhere next, to your building. Nature thinks very differently, and this is one of the most exciting conversation that we have in our research lab. Is nature doesn't design everything to last forever. Nature designs for transformation. Bacteria, algae, they live for a few hundred years. Animals, people live for a few hundred years. Trees can live for a few thousand years, if so. Birds have a shorter lifetime, of 15 to 5 years. But they all have a purpose. At the end of their life, they become part of other nutrition cycle. But when we look at synthetic materials that we create, we want them to last long. So we can sell them off, So when customers buy and use them, there's little risk on the manufacturer's side. But when we transform them, we make extremely synthetic materials, and it's always at the cost of nature. So that's a particular green charcoal research that I have been working on for the last 2 years. It follows these principles that, like nature, buildings also need not last forever. So it's a research in developing biomaterial or bioconstruction material using loofah, which is a vegetable that we use to scrub our bodies, if so, and charcoal, which is an amazing absorbent of nitrates from the atmosphere. So charcoal, loofah, soil has been used to create a composite that can allow plants to grow on them. And because plants grow on them, then at the end of the life, when say a building is lasting for 5 years, if plants have constantly captured carbon dioxide from the air, we actually are getting materials which are much more richer towards the end of their life than what we designed them to be. Another thing which the green charcoal does is it understands scientific potential of the loofah, which is a vegetable fiber, and because it's so porous in nature, it also allows the material to be much more temperature resilient. So if you build a wall using the green charcoal, the interiors are going to be much more cooler. The interiors also, because it absorbs a lot of water, because the porosity, plants are naturally growing on it. But my point being, it's not a material that is only designed from point of view of a building solution. If we understand, if we keep materials independent from their function, and if we design and investigate, perhaps they want to be something else. Perhaps they are better fit in the fashion or product industry where they can be transformative. Also, what we have done over here is at the end of the life of the green charcoal, we crushed some materials and tried to plant seeds, and ta-da, we had some germination happening, which is a great sign or proof of concept. That's some of the works done by my students. Tanvi and Mehek on the left side have looked at developing materials from food industry. So oysters, which, the oyster shells, which typically is a redundant waste that is dumped back in the ocean, is ground down along with the waste from cane industries to create a material that's super porous. Now, the porosity was not an intention over here, because the students used a bio binder or a bio glue, which we in fact use in creating laddus. It's called dink. It fermented the entire mixture, and because of the fermentation, earlier they perceived it as something which is stinky, not so nice, it's really bad to work with. But it actually, resulted in a lightweight material. So by using little resources, you're creating big volumes. And of course, it's an open-ended application where these could be, flooring, these could be walling materials, or these could become chairs and, tables for the future. And on the same side, these guys are also looking at natural pigmentation using turmeric, using, flowers. If we can color our resources with safer materials, they are much more better, ready to degrade in the nature at the end of their life. That's some other examples from Sarah and the team. We're looking at leather from the industry, fashion industry. Right from Thara, we took the scrappings from the leather hide and looked at what could this potentially be. So they figured using ceramics and using leather created a material mixture that was super strong, where the leather was allowing some level of reinforcement, and the ceramic was becoming more like a base medium for construction. And they thought these could become cladding materials for our walls, and we use lesser cement in our day-to-day life. And we know cement is one of the larger contributors of climate change, because Building industry is responsible for 40% of resources that we use, and also is responsible for around 8% of carbon emissions, straightforward here. But these are passive materials. So far what I've shown you all, they have capacity of transforming within themselves and of course transforming the nature around it. But some materials are also active, literally in the sense of how they're transforming in their color, in their shape, in their form. So that's the research I was part of around 5 years ago during my master's in Barcelona. It's called self-adaptive membrane, where we looked at nitinol, which is a beautiful metal made from nickel and titanium, and that can be programmed to take a certain shape. So we looked at capacity, cutting the story short, we looked at the capacity of this expansion of material, coupling that with architecture to create facade systems that can open up, every time there is sun, so we can harness the heat if we require. But on the other hand, the materiality is also multi-scalar. We thought if we couple the idea of shape memory alloys and shape transforming materials in the fashion industry, can we walk in the sun and our garments can explode, in area where the heat is coming from? So we're looking at transforming environments, much more interactive environments, exactly where there's no use of technology, there's no use of power, there's no use of batteries, but the material itself is the technique, like nature. Where we have a couple of cells that are the physical form, and then they interact with each other through nutrition, through signals, and that's how organisms are made. Nature is technology at the end. Much of my research that I've been doing, because it's young, it's part of a research lab. We are looking at taking the research further and making it more commercial ready. A lot of corporates do visit us and they ask us, can I make a building using this? Can I make a garment using the bio fabric made from starch? The answer is yes, but not today. It does take time for materials to be completely resilient for all kinds of performances from health, safety, packaging, transformation point of view. But there is potential. Plastics today that you use are 50-year-old material and they have reached their peak in the last decade. Ceramics and concretes are 200-year-old materials. So even if you have to start investigating and developing alternate materiality, and the results may not be too soon, there is a promise of it. And this particular studio from Netherlands is trying to bridge that gap between research, experiences, and industry. The example center is using animal bones to create products around us, or even using fish leather. Now, fish leather is much more sustainable from virtual carbon footprint point of view. We always assume carbon footprint to be the amount of carbon emissions your products are releasing right now. But that's not true. If you take an example of cattle industry, when you eat beef or when you eat buffalo, the carbon footprint is the entire lifetime of investment by the farmer or by the cattle owner who gave the cattle water, land to eat, resources to survive, and then the energy used in the equipments used to transform animal into food is all calculated. Whereas if you look at fishes, they live in the natural environment, their life cycles are much faster, so they regenerate at a different rate as compared to cattle, and hence fish leather is much more sustainable as an option to use in our products. That's something, that's a new industry coming up called the material passport. One of the biggest problems that we face in recycling or refurbishing is after you use your products, we don't know how to recycle them, or we don't know how much they have regenerated. For example, take a plastic bottle that we are used to drinking water in. If you happen to fill hot water in them, they release chemicals. They release chemicals in a very small quantity, but if you keep repeating that couple of times, a regular plastic bottle which have been housing cold water versus plastic bottle which has had warm water will be much more damaged. But who keeps a track of this? So material passport looks at documenting the life journey of materials in any industry, with architecture, in product, in fashion, or in jewelry. At the end of the life, we understand from science point of view what the capacity of this material is, so we can be better informed to design the next life. It's a booming industry. There's very little references on the internet, and it's also a long process. Circular economy, as we all have heard, like I've referred in indirect ways, is not about recycling just quantum or quantity. It's about recycling value. So instead of grounding down our jeans, or instead of grounding down our shoes to create a composite, can we design from point of view of disassembly where we can keep the material properties intact and then be able to recycle their values. And of course, the end result the end result of the process is the environment stays safer. People do get the experiences that they deserve, but the economy that you invest is also much lesser and profitable. It creates new jobs. That's my segment of just poking on the idea of what is luxury. We do live typically in India. I can say that we assume recycle to be cheap. Can recycle be sexy? Can recycle be gorgeous? Can recycle be sustainable? And can all of that be luxury? Much like the example of fish leather, which is market ready right now. But who is a materials designer? And that's the bigger question. In the last 50 years, 5 decades, materials have been developed by scientists, and engineers have given purpose to them or meaning to them from objects. Designers came much later in the picture. But today, because of the age of information, interconnectedness, collaboration, we all are equipped to design our own materials. The downside is it's very difficult to design something which is 100% biodegradable because it has lesser life. But that's the ultimate goal, is how do you change the mindset that it's okay for our products to be temporary. It's okay for our jewelry to disappear. It's okay for our buildings to transform. And I'll leave you all with the last image. It's two industries, like the two cultures. One extremely human resource intensive, and one extremely material resource intensive. And while architecture keeps the human body safe, fashion I see as an industry which keeps the skin safe. So they are very similar and yet of very different scales, depending heavily on resources. Can we find new ways of looking at materiality in these industries and define the future? That's what I leave you all with. Thank you.
Shreya, thank you. That was so enlightening for me, and I think and my question is, and the challenge is, what are we doing in the jewelry industry? Do we have designer material? Are we designing new material for the jewelry industry? How? Are we creating new alloy? Are you creating new techniques? Are we reusing our gemstones and the waste? Are we using the waste of diamonds and gemstones and the powder? How are we using it? I mean, that's the question. It's just about recycling, it's about upcycling, but also maybe redesigning and creating new materials within our industry that could still be considered precious, even though titanium is one of the biggest hit right now in high-end jewelry. And you know what I mean? It's like, is it as precious as gold? That's the question. But the pieces that have been designed with titanium, they're definitely more expensive than 24-karat gold pieces. So, if we are designing, let's design let's have a new mindset about jewelry, and let's include these values. Another thing in terms of design, because we'll be working together, as an industry, also communicating to the world, also the design language, the visual language. Do you see what kind of visual language we are seeing today in terms of communicating values and evolution? And so I don't see that happening in the jewelry industry yet. I see us being very archaic and old-fashioned and old. I think that it's time that we embrace a new language, and I hope that what we are seeing today can influence our vision, the way we are presenting, which is, I'd like to hear more values around the product, which is not, yes, it's to be heritage. We have an heritage session coming up soon, but what does it mean, heritage? And also how we take the heritage forward. So Narendra was talking about evolution. How are we evolving this industry? Do you have questions to Shreya or anybody? Yes.
to add one more thing. At least our industries can begin with a packaging material. What is this thing?
What are you talking? I'm sorry, I missed the question. What was it about the packaging? I'm sorry, I lost you.
See, we're using
Yes,
our industry
absolutely.
is using most of the plastic fibers and everything.
This is great.
in industries.
I think it's
So we
fantastic.
can at least stepping forward with these materials.
Yes,
Okay.
we can. I think the packaging, yes, but I think also we have to do it with jewelry as well, right? I think that, and diamonds and the stone and I mean, what are we doing with all this, waste? I mean, we are cutting stones. Are we using this material? Yes, okay, let's help people that are using it already. Let's promote their work. Shreya was, introduced the designer material. I mean, do we have anyone designing material in our industry? Yes, there is some people at PVD, new way of, physical vaporization deposit that they are creating, new way of, coloring metal. I mean, we have blue gold, yellow, brown gold. There is all this stuff, but there are also new alloy. What are we doing? What are you doing? I mean, you being the youth and the youth of jewelry, or are you just keep doing only the 18 or 24 carat or the 14 carat gold pieces like the 18th century? I mean, how have we, evolved, and are we evolving our industry? And also, how are we sustainable? How are we are involved with the circular economy? So I think that's very important. So when we are designing and you're planning to design, maybe we should start including this element. One of the things that I'm always saying, one of the biggest ways that I see in general in manufacturing, in India, especially in India, but not only in India, it's designing. You have thousands of pieces, and you have so many components, we call it components, or call it findings, whatever you call it, then they're no longer used. Why don't you go back in your factories and reuse the components and redesign and reinterpret this piece? I mean, it's like, so we have to really go back and really treasure and leverage. So that's, we have the economy, we have the manufacturing process, and we are reusing design element that can be taken to the next level. So that's basically it.
Thank you, Paula.
Thank you,
One
Shreya.
example I would like
You're
to give
great.
just,
Thank you. I was very impressed.
to the point about packaging industry, I would like to add that it's not just the packaging sort of design as it's in its own, but also the kind of consumerism model we are trapped into. The more number of people end up buying online products, the more packaging layer it requires because they are transported. So you call for a mobile scratch card and it comes in a bubble wrap. It comes with a paper on it. So it's not just the packaging industry or the use of plastics, but we have to look at the entire system, of the transportation and the material life, and perhaps then we'll be able to find better answers for each and every stakeholder, in the process. So yeah, thank you.
Thank you so much, Chris. That was such an interesting session. Now, ladies and gentlemen, let me tell you, break for lunch. But before that, one very important announcement that Paola Di Luca and Thomas Lazzarini's roundtable session will happen right here in this banquet. So whoever has signed up for it, please be present from 2:30 onwards. Your session will start. And it's a kind request to everybody to please be back at 2:40 p.m. sharp, as we're really running a little bit late on time. So we can start with our next session at 2:40 p.m. sharp. Enjoy your lunch. Thank you.